Good morning. Still a couple minutes early. Are you all ready? Yeah. Well, we try to be on time. This time we're even a little ahead of schedule. So.
Tell us a story while we wait. Tell us about the fish you caught a week ago. Did you clean that yourself?
No, we threw that one back actually. But I caught that one just before dark on Saturday night a week ago, right off the dock. Yeah, we threw it back. Marcus had a bigger one on and it broke his line. Well, I assume it was bigger because it broke his line. So, but yeah, we've got pretty good fishing. We've caught as many as 6 different species off of the dock there at Lake Panorama. I think maybe the funniest thing that happened on this whole flood tour was when this one elderly woman whose house was badly flooded, and we were visiting with her, and she was trying to clean it out and everything, and as we're getting done with it, I said, "What's your name?" And after that, Director Scouten said, were you a teacher? And she said yes, and it turned out she was his kindergarten teacher.
Governor, he's brought proof.
He's got his
kindergarten graduation card.
Donna Underwood.
Donna Underwood.
Very interesting story, but it's what a small world it is. And Mark's mother and sister were up there too in Rock Valley, so it is a small world, and it is reassuring when you have the director of emergency management, Homeland Security emergency management from that area who they know personally, and so it was good to have him with on that flood tour that we did in Rock Rapids and Rock Valley. I think we're about ready to start. It's about 9 o'clock. My watch says it is 9. So, well, good morning. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Today I've asked Iowa Homeland Security Emergency Management Department Director Mark Scouten to accompany us for our weekly press conference to update Iowans on the ongoing flooding situation across the state. Over the past week, Iowa has experienced above average rainfalls that have caused rivers to top their banks and streams and creeks to swell. In northwest Iowa, the communities of Rock Rapids and Rock Valley saw over 10 inches of rain in just a few days. In central Iowa, some communities have seen more rain in 24 hours than they usually get in a whole month. In eastern Iowa, the Mississippi River is expected to crest above flood stage in the Quad Cities. This is due in part to the Davenport area receiving above average rain in the month of June. The Cedar River in Cedar Rapids is expected to crest at about 16 feet, which would mean some flooding in parks. Last week, Director Scouten and I had the opportunity to visit with residents of Lyon and Sioux counties as we surveyed flood-affected areas. As disaster hit the communities of Rock Rapids and Rock Valley, citizens were quick to point out the generosity of many of their friends and neighbors who came to help. Mike Clarenbeek, who owns the Rock Auto Repair, which sits right along the Rock River in Rock Rapids, told us of the help that he'd received from his friends and family in the lead up to the flood and as the water receded. As we walked through his business, and Mark and I were right there in his business, we saw friends and neighbors that were helping wash and clean up the equipment so he could get his business back up and in operation very quickly. In Rock Valley, I was told that 1,700 volunteers showed up to help sandbag in that community, which has a total population of 3,300. So tremendous outpouring of volunteers who helped, and we saw really miles of sandbags that they were able to put together in a very short period of time to protect homes. There are 2 schools that just barely avoided being damaged by the floods. I heard from I think it's what is it? What's the residential place? Hope Haven,
Yeah.
which is for handicapped and disabled individuals. They had to evacuate, They were very complimentary of the Department of Inspections and Appeals and the help that they received in helping relocate those people temporarily, and they received tremendous cooperation from the community as well as leadership from the Department of Inspections and Appeals. It's with this same spirit of community that the Lieutenant Governor Reynolds and I and Director Scouten pledged to continue working to provide state resources to communities during these difficult times. We've added additional counties to the designation, and I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant Governor Reynolds to tell you more about the counties that have been added and additional things that are going to be done by the state. Lieutenant Governor Reynolds.
Thank you, Governor, and good morning. This spring has brought several weather events that prompted the state to issue proclamations of disaster. And on June 3rd, severe thunderstorms rolled across the state, causing the following counties to have disaster proclamations issued: Adams, Clark, Pottawatomie, Cass, Harrison, Montgomery, Ringgold, Decatur, Mills, Taylor, and Wayne. And in addition to the state's individual assistance program was activated for the counties of Decatur and Cass, Harrison, Montgomery, Pottawatomie, and Ringgold. The programs grant up to $5,000 for households with incomes up to 200% of the federal poverty level. Grants are available for home repairs, replacement of clothing and food, and the expense of temporary housing. And due to the most recent storms, Governor Branstad has issued a proclamation of disaster for the following counties that have had significant rainfall and flooding: Cedar, Lyon, Plymouth, Pocahontas, Sioux, Buena Vista, Cherokee, Clay, Dickinson, Franklin, Hancock, Ida, Kossuth, Osceola, Palo Alto, Sac, Woodbury, and Wright. The state's individual assistant program was activated for 2 counties, and that was Hancock and Kossuth, and we'll continue monitoring the situation to determine if the individual assistance program can be launched in the other counties that I just mentioned. In addition, the Iowa Homeland Security Emergency Management Division is in regular contact with local emergency management coordinators to determine if other counties need state resources also. So unlike most disasters, flooding can be prolonged disaster event, and Iowans can rest assured that we'll continue to assist in preparation for flooding during the event and, of course, in the recovery phase also. And so now I'm pleased to welcome Director Scouten to the podium. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you, Governor Branstad, Lieutenant Governor Reynolds. The Iowa Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management is coordinating our response during this most flooding and severe weather event from the State Emergency Operations Center in Johnston. We have seen the damage the flooding has caused to the northwest part of the state, and we're seeing additional damage as the rain moves easterly. Fortunately, we're in for a 2 or 3 day reprieve right now. We hope that will allow the water levels to drop without further damage. But in the meantime, the state, most of the ground remains pretty water saturated. And as such, we are vulnerable to future flooding should additional rain occur. With numerous rivers continuing flooding on rivers continuing to impact large portions of the state, we continue to monitor those river systems closely, including the Missouri and the Mississippi. As the governor mentioned, Lieutenant Governor mentioned too, the Quad Cities area below Davenport, we expect additional the rain that we have had to cause additional flooding in that area as the tributaries run into the Mississippi. Likewise, the Cedar River up in Cedar Falls and Cedar Rapids, we expect a minor to moderate flooding there. Currently, if you were to check the river gauges in Iowa, you would see that there is moderate to major flooding up in northwest Iowa on the Little Sioux rivers, in Correctionville and Lynn Grove. But other than that, the Missouri itself, the predictions that were not realized, and the flooding there and the water levels there are less than what we had feared they would get. In addition to the rivers, we are monitoring the state's major reservoirs, 3 in particular, the Saylorville, the Red Rock, and the Coralville reservoirs, particularly as the rain moves to the east. At the Saylorville Reservoir, the highest water level has been forecasted for June 30 or July 1 around 880 feet, with the spillway crest at 884 feet. We have reason to believe that that estimate may be a little high. Likewise, the Corps of Engineers can deploy a pneumatic gate system to increase the spillway height at Saylorville by an additional 6 feet. So right now, we think we're in pretty good shape as the spillway or the reservoir is operating at 23% of total flood capacity. And those things can change as the rain changes. At Red Rock, the current level is 745 feet. Likewise, we feel we have a good deal of flood capacity left in that reservoir. Coralville, near Iowa City, being the same, where we feel we have a good deal of flood capacity left in that reservoir also. It's a tough time, nonetheless, for many of our fellow Iowans as they deal with the devastation and the destruction of their homes and of their communities. The governor and I witnessed this firsthand last week as we traveled to Rock Valley and Rock Rapids. As we toured those cities, in addition to the damage that you could see both from the air and on the ground, we saw how despair brings out the goodness in Iowans. We saw neighbors helping neighbors. We saw, as the governor mentioned, levees constructed by literally thousands of volunteers. In Rock Valley alone, volunteers put together a levee system that was some 8,080 feet long in length to protect the various parts of that city. We witnessed the Iowa spirit that the governor mentioned, and we hear so much about and we witness firsthand every time our department is involved in disasters of this nature. We also saw the hard work that the county emergency managers do as they oversee their county's response to these disasters. Many emergency managers, even those without ongoing flooding or severe weather in their counties, pitched in to help their fellow emergency managers in the impacted areas with their time, expertise, and resources, exchanging pumps, sandbags, and other equipment to help in this flood fight. Clearly, the local emergency managers play a critical role in making sure our emergency response system works. What are we doing at the state level? At the state level, our job is to get those who are handling the disaster the resources they need to protect their communities and their citizens. Over the past 10 days, the state has responded in a myriad of ways and to a myriad of requests for resources, and has been able to effect a coordinated delivery of a variety of resources, including nearly 270,000 sandbags, 245 tons of sand, rolls and rolls of poly sheeting that are used to create sandbag levees and to protect those levees once they are formed. We have sent high capacity pumps out to remove flood waters that had same pumps that had been earlier pre-positioned to be ready for floods of this nature, and those pumps have moved like chess pieces as the county coordinators have asked for those pumps to pump out water treatment systems and pump out water behind levees and storm sewers. We've sent out reflective barriers for access control. We activated the Homeland Security Urban Search and Rescue Team out of Sioux City to help in Rock Valley to provide lighting systems and to do swift water rescues. I believe they did some 16 or 17 swift water evacuations with their specialized equipment. The Department of Corrections deployed a debris removal team to assist with the cleanup in one or two communities. Officers from the Department of Public Safety helped with access control in numerous counties. As the governor mentioned, the DIA played a critical role in moving handicapped and mentally retarded clients at Hope Haven to a church Faith Christian Reformed Church in Rock Valley, where they were secure from the floodwaters that came right up to the group homes in Hope Haven. In addition to monitoring and maintaining its own road system, the Department of Transportation has assisted HSEMD in moving important equipment around the state. The state's Volunteers Assisting in Disasters is providing hundreds of home cleanup kits for those with flooded basements. The Corps of Engineers has provided flood engineers and pumps to assist with local personnel. And last but certainly not least, the Iowa National Guard has assisted us, Homeland Security Emergency Management, with warehouse and logistical support and stands ready should this flooding worsen. So what happens next? Depends upon the weather to a large extent. But as the governor, lieutenant governor has mentioned, 18 counties have already been included in the governor's proclamation of disaster emergency from this most recent round of flooding and severe weather. Our next step will be to determine if the resulting damage is enough to request federal assistance. So beginning Thursday, our department and FEMA, along with local officials, will begin what's called a joint preliminary damage assessment for those all 18 of those counties, and Governor Branstad can use the results of that joint preliminary damage assessment to request a presidential disaster declaration, which will bring with it federal aid if it is awarded by the president. The assessments will primarily cover public infrastructure such as roads, bridges, public buildings, and rural utility systems. Assessors will also be looking at the number of homes that have sustained damage because of this flooding to determine if federal aid may be requested for those individual home owners. Talking with Pat Hall a few minutes ago from our recovery division, he indicated there may be as many as 100 to 150 homes that have suffered major damages because of this flooding. Right now, we estimate that the total damages to date may be in excess of $11 million. In addition to this pending damage assessment, HSEMD, FEMA, and local officials are also just finishing up on a joint damage assessment in 10 counties that sustained damages during the June 3rd severe weather event. Although that assessment is not completely finished, we estimate damages there may be approaching $4.5 million. We hope to have those final results shortly. We will present them to the governor, and the governor then can decide whether he will request a presidential disaster declaration on that disaster. Let me conclude by saying that right now we continue to watch the weather. We watch the water levels at our major reservoirs and the stream gauges on those rivers where flooding is happening. We continue to work closely with our local emergency management coordinators so we get situational awareness in their counties. The National Weather Service says we are in a wet period, and even though we're getting a 2 or 3 day reprieve, the wet period probably will not suddenly end. As such, we will continue to monitor this situation, and we'll be prepared to act as circumstances warrant to protect the citizens of the state of Iowa. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much. When I was in Rock Valley, the administrator of Hope Haven gave me this little piece of paper. I wrote the name Katie Campbell on from the Department of Inspections and Appeals and said wanted to make sure that we appreciated the leadership that she provided in helping the residents of Hope Haven during that time of emergency that they had during the flooding. So it's nice to hear that kind of work from some of our state employees that are out there in the field. We'd be glad to respond to questions you might have on this subject.
Mark, did the $4.5 million talking about June 3rd, was that included in the overall $11 million, or is that something?
It's a separate event. Separate event. It'll be a separate request for on the two combined. Correct.
I would also point out that this does not include crop damage. in the old days, we used to include that, but now the farmers, the Farm Service Agency goes directly on that. So that's now handled by the Farm Services Agency, which is, of course, a federal part of the Department of Agriculture. So, and I can tell you, having been to Council Bluffs, there are, in some areas in southwest Iowa, considerable hail damage in addition to flood damage that we've seen in northwest Iowa. So you will have substantial crop damage separate and above what we've talked about here today.
Mark, if you had to guess, how close would you say this is to being at the level before?
We're optimistic, yes, that once the assessment is completed, the damages unfortunately are sufficient, that we certainly will be requesting the presidential declaration. That decision ultimately is made by the president.
So a total of 15.5 million this month?
Or two, yes,
Okay,
correct.
and if that's mainly to public structures, does that include homes as well?
That will not include the homes, does not include the crop damage. It is primarily damages to public infrastructure, public buildings, secondary roads. I have to tell you, we have secondary roads that are still underwater. So we don't know how much damage they sustained. Bridges, county bridges, scoured by a really swift water. We saw it outside of Rock Rapids and Rock Valley, Rock River running fast, doing damage. Does not include homes. That will be on top of it.
Yeah, it doesn't
That'll
include
be
the crop
included in
damage,
that.
which is through the Farm Service Agencies, which I would guess would also be significant.
Should people fear that we could be running into another 2008 or 1993 here? Are we on the verge of that?
Well, in 1993, all 99 counties were declared a disaster area. I mean, if the rain continues, if it intensifies that we saw in early July of 93, I suppose that's possible. We're very hopeful that's not going to be the case. Actually, I've also seen some very good crops around the state as I travel. Corn is much higher than normal at this time, and consequently, it all depends upon where the weather goes from here. If it gets better, and generally when you get into July, it starts getting drier. Looks like a wetter than normal year, but I guess the future will determine whether it's going to become the kind of critical situation. So we're hopeful, but we also need to be prepared for the worst as well.
Governor, or Scotland, every other year now, and 4 years, is the state not doing enough for mitigation?
Well, it's hard to say. I think, first of all, it's hard to predict where these things are going to happen. I was governor in 93, where we really got hammered here in central Iowa, and we lost our waterworks here in Des Moines. Then in 2008, it was more eastern Iowa that got hit. So it all depends upon where and when you have 10 inches of rain, almost in a very short period of time, it's hard to predict where that might happen. And consequently, I don't know that it's possible to be prepared for every single event like that can occur. We need, and I think we have made a lot of progress. Des Moines, because of what we did after 93, did not have the severe damage in 2008 and has been able to do pretty well through these. Cedar Rapids obviously is in the process of rebuilding after the 2008 flood. In Iowa City, you have tremendous amount of reconstruction and going on at the University of Iowa that was severely flooded in 2008. But we need to obviously prepare as best we can, but it's hard to predict where these things might happen. I mean, a month ago, they were talking about Rock Valley, Rock Rapids, Northwest Iowa being the driest part of the state. And now all of a sudden, that's where we have the worst flooding a month later. So this can change overnight.
Somewhere in your mind, is this the credence to efforts to mitigate climate change? In your mind?
Well, I've lived through a lot of different severe weather issues over the years. And sometimes it's tornadoes, sometimes it's ice storms, sometimes it's flooding. 2011, we dealt with the flood along the Missouri River, which to a great degree I think was actually caused by the Corps of Engineers not letting out water soon enough from the upstream dams, and we had a flood that lasted from the 1st of June until mid-September. But you have to try to deal with whatever comes your way, and I think it's critically important that we as leaders of the state be there and respond and help people in time of need and reassure them that the state will provide assistance in addition to what's done locally. I'm very proud of the fact that we have just a lot of people that volunteer and pitch in and help their neighbors in times of emergency, and that has gone a long ways to mitigating what could have been more severe damage in places like Rock Rapids and Rock Valley.
Yes, Governor, but does that lend credence to carbon credits, carbon sequestration, instead of just reacting to, in your mind?
Well, and that's a whole different issue. When you start talking about cap and trade and things like that, then you're talking about putting a severe cost on consumers and on production in America. And I guess I have really big questions about that. I think many people really question whether we should be spending billions and billions of dollars for something like that. I think we need to be thoughtful. We need to be as prepared as we can be, but I think we got to be careful about overreacting and committing ourselves to massive costs that make America uncompetitive.
But what about permanent flood prevention infrastructure?
Well, we've done a lot to put that infrastructure in place and to give people the option of moving out of heavily flood-prone areas. But also, I think we do need to respect the individual property rights and homeowners. And there are some people that want to live along the river and are willing to take some of the risks with that. One of the big problems also is the dramatic increase we've seen now by the federal government in flood insurance costs. Some of those costs have gone way up. I think there is legislation at the federal level to try to address that, but the costs of flood insurance in many cases have tripled or become very almost unaffordable to many homeowners or many businesses.
They're doing the evacuation. So,
Well, I mentioned the evacuation of Hope Haven. Well, and this is the great thing about Iowa. There's a lot of times family and friends that will take people in, but I think there were evacuations up there in both Rock Valley and Rock Rapids because of the flooding.
What's your reaction to the nomination? In particular, elevating some of the nominee.
Well, I think it's a real tribute to David Young that you had many strong candidates. You had 6 candidates. You had 5 of them that were all pretty strong. But he was wise in not alienating the supporters of others. So when you have that many candidates, being the second choice turned out to be a pretty good situation. And I was impressed that while others attacked each other, David never did that. He stayed positive, and he had a very clear message, and he, of course, had significant experience having worked with Senator Grassley and having been part of what Grassley's done to expose some of the problems in Washington, D.C., Fast and Furious and some of those things. So I really believe that he turned out to be a good consensus choice. And I think as the convention went on, as you know, it went several ballots, he emerged as somebody that could pull the party together and could win the general election for Republicans in the 3rd district. So I think he'll be a strong candidate, and I think he's a thoughtful individual and somebody that will be will be a good person to have on the ticket.
He starts out with Stacey Apple starts out with a big financial advantage. I think she had like $460,000 in the bank. She's got like $600,000.
Right.
A bunch of loans. And of course, there's been this big division argument within the party. Number one, can the party come together? And number two, can he raise enough money financially to defeat her?
Well, I remember early on when people were saying Mark Jacobs has millions of dollars and Joni Ernst has virtually nothing, and look what happened. Jacobs came in third, and Joni Ernst emerged as the winner and got 56% of the vote. Money isn't everything. And I believe having a good candidate that can bring people together makes a lot of sense. I think the Democrats are the ones that made the big mistake. By clearing the field and having no competition for the United States Senate seat and giving Braley the nomination without any competition, doing the same thing with Stacey Apple in the governor's race, what happened is they had very low turnout in their primaries, much less than the Republicans. Even up in Northeast Iowa, the first district, where they had a big contest, there were many more Republicans that voted than Democrats. Then you have the situation where there were more Republicans at the district convention, with 1/4 of the state, than there were at the Democrat state convention. So they had less than half their delegates showed. That shows lack of enthusiasm, lack of interest, whereas Republicans have a lot of enthusiastic candidates, and I believe the choice of David Young is a consensus candidate who can bring the party together. I'm excited about this. You've heard me say this before. I want to lead the whole team to victory. I think 2014 is a year we have great opportunity, and I'm very excited about the caliber of candidates we have in all 4 of the congressional districts, all the state offices, the legislative races as well. So, we're not taking anything for granted. We're going to continue to work extremely hard, but I feel real good about it, and I think the convention over the weekend, the end of the day, with 6 candidates, with 5 of them that were very competitive, I think they chose somebody that can bring the party together and has a great chance of winning.
Thank you, Governor.
Something that the state maybe should revisit the nomination.
Well, obviously, this is our law, and this is the system that we presently have. But a number of states have gone to a runoff if nobody gets a majority, or if nobody gets the nomination. Say, well, our law is 35%. Nobody gets 35%. Some states have gone to a situation where a month later you'd have a runoff between the top 2. That's something that might be worth considering, but obviously it's not relevant now because we have to live with the present law we have. That, I think, worked effectively in this case, and I think future General Assembly can take a look at whether they think the system should change. There was a time when we used to nominate people strictly by convention. I'll just tell you a little story about this, because there was a congressman named Haugen, Bert Haugen, and he was. Have you ever heard of the McNary-Haugen Farm Bill? Well, this was back during the 1920s, and Haugen was from Northwood, but how he got the nomination was really interesting. In 1898, the incumbent Republican was from Clayton County, and then there was another Republican from Mason City who was very aligned with the railroad interests. And Haugen was kind of the third-party dark horse. They had the convention in New Hampton, and it went, I don't know, 200 or 300 ballots. Eventually, 200 or 300 ballots, I'm not kidding you. They said that they had a band that played "It's Going to Be a Hot Time in the Old Town Tonight," and it was very prophetic of how the convention went. Haugen emerged. He ended up on the, whatever it was, 200 or 300 and some ballots, as the nominee, and of course was elected to Congress in 1898, and he served from 1898 until 1932. He lost in the Roosevelt landslide in 1932, but he served from 1898 to 1932, and I think Neil Smith finally broke his record as the longest serving congressman in Iowa. But think of that period of time. He served from before the automobile until 1932. Very interesting guy. He was a farmer and a significant landowner in the neighboring county of Worth County. I can tell you that since being from, he served one term in the Iowa legislature, but Winnebago County and Worth County were together, and my home county, Winnebago County, took the convention away from him, so he only got one term in the Iowa House, but then he got the consolation prize a couple years later when he got the congressional seat, so. No, I'm just telling you.
I know, yeah.
Iowa State University Press has the book on Gilbert Haugen, and it's pretty fascinating. His home is in Northwood, where you know it's not public property or anything like that. But he was from Northwood, and he was a Norwegian. So I had a little interest in learning the history of Congressman. Okay. Anyway, I'm kind of a student of Iowa political history, I guess you might say. Thank you very much.